Okay, welcome everyone to the second edition of the Leaders Cafe. And today we're going to be discussing how to do hybrid right. Uh, Call it a buzzword, call it a dangerous word, call it an exciting word, but hybrid has become a part of our lives, right? And it's a word that all of us are hearing so often. And today I'm really excited to have our guest speaker with us, somebody I really admire and respect, Krishna Raghavan, the Chief People Officer, HR Head of Flipkart. Welcome, Krishna.
Thank you so much, Gatik. The appreciation
Thanks.
is mutual.
Yeah, no, thanks for making time. And I do have to say that the one thing, and I've said this to you, but for our viewers also to know, the one thing that I uh, really find admirable about you and unique about you, and which I think will add a lot of flavor to this, is, you know, being a business leader leading HR with that, duality. And I can't say I've seen you through that transition, but I've known you before, and now I know you now in this role as well, and I know that side of you. So I'm sure it's going to be an interesting chat listening to your perspectives about how to do hybrid right. So once again, thanks for making time for this, Krishna. Freewheeling conversation, really, Krishna, as it is usually, and some broad milestone questions to set the ball rolling. But really, the intent is to, when we started this, the idea was how can we bring up or bring to our viewers conversations, dialogues about things that are important in the moment.
Hmm.
And you and I both know, and I'm sure everybody watching knows that weaving through, navigating through this hybrid is becoming a challenge and a reality for everybody. And we thought, let's pick up this topic. I don't think we know the right answers. While we're helping some of our clients, I think we're still figuring out, and most organizations are. So maybe to start off, Krishna, would love to hear your views on, how are you at Flipkart defining hybrid? Because hybrid could mean different things to different people. What is Flipkart's take on it, and what is the format that you're driving? So maybe you can start off with that.
Sure, Gatik. First of all, I'd like to also say in full disclosure that I don't claim to have all the answers on hybrid as well.
We're in the
Um,
same.
yeah, I think we are still evolving our thought process on that, and the best feedback we get is from our employees. When we talk to them and when we hear about the different approaches we have taken in the past and are taking currently. So let me take a step back and talk a little bit about how we think about hybrid. And you're absolutely right. Hybrid could mean a lot of things, like the word culture could mean a lot of things, right? And therefore, I would start with just how setting out the approach we took to even defining hybrid, and how did we
Hmm.
arrive upon the right construct for hybrid which made sense for Flipkart. First is, I think it all starts with the organizational culture and values. What defines your DNA, what defines your company, and how does general work take place in your company, the
Hmm.
types of roles you have in your company. So we started by actually analyzing the different aspects of work that we do within the company and the roles that we have on offer. And like any other company, you have 100 different type of roles, right? In multiples of 100, in fact. And the parameters we sort of looked at, first of all, is how does work happen in the company, how much of it requires collaboration, innovation. uh, for instance, our value around audacity.
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
how how do we think about audacity in a world which is different post pandemic? So these were some of the considerations that we took, and I'm just giving examples of both values and some of the things that define work at Flipkart. And I often use this example. It's a kind of a very interesting quirk about Flipsters, is that when we are brainstorming in a room, we actually use the markers that we typically use on the whiteboards on the desks. And
On
you've
the
seen that.
tables. Yeah, yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
I was quite confused the first time I saw that in a few meetings. I'm like, "Arey, it'll get spoiled," but it's obviously the ones that clean up. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And yeah, we've designed tables like that. So, that's how we brainstorm, right? And the organizational context also is that we are working in a vertical, in a domain which is has very low penetration today in the country, which is e-commerce, and has massive upside.
Mm.
And it's a hyper competitive landscape as well. So you take many of these factors into account: the organizational context, the culture, values, the kind of business you're operating in, to define how does work look like for you in this new world, so to speak. And then we arrived at this point about saying, you know what, depending on the type of role that you perform in the company, we believe that a healthy mix of in person interactions, human interactions, and remote will work for us. And the spectrum of how much in person and how much you need to work remotely depends on the role you perform in the company.
Right.
But the sweet spot that we figured out for ourselves is start with maybe a couple of days in office, in work, in person, and about 3 days remote. And that's what we launched hybrid into for the rest of the company. Uh, it's very important to note for Flipkart that we have a large number of people in our supply chain, and obviously they need to be on site. In fact, 5 days a week, in some cases 6 days a week. So that anyway continues. That's a different type of a role which requires in-person interaction entire time. But for all the other roles, we defined this as the hybrid and we move forward. I thought it was important for me to set the background about how we thought about it and how we arrived at the construct.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that. And in your space, it's also fairly unique because I'm sure the last 2 years have given a huge boost to your to Flipkart, and the consumers have changed. You've had a huge uptake on first time consumers, right? I was hearing your interview with ET as well. And the kind of consumers, the kind of even suppliers that have come into the market are a lot. So there's so much growth that's happened there. um, I was also wondering, because I know that there's been such a lot of growth that you would have had, Krishna, over the last 2 years in terms of people. Um, how are you looking at, or how have you tried to solve for onboarding of the new people, the new talent that you're getting in the hybrid? Because you're hearing a lot of our clients talk about that being one of the immediate areas of concern when we're hiring people during the hybrid. How do you kind of integrate them to the culture and stuff? What has Flipkart done? What are your views around that?
No, that's a great question, Gatik. And a lot of organizations across industries have faced that because maybe you've hired somebody in the last couple of years who's never seen the office, right? And never seen anybody in person, maybe within a team. So that, in fact, Gatik, was one of the most important considerations when we thought about the 2+3 hybrid policy at Flipkart, which we are continually evolving. Because new leader assimilation or new employee assimilation, both mattered a lot to us. And what we saw through employee voices, even through the 2 years that we worked remotely, is that the sense of belonging gets impacted quite a bit within a construct, within an organization. And maybe you could argue that we haven't figured out how to inculcate a sense of belonging in a remote scenario yet in the world. Maybe we haven't figured out that answer, but certainly it needs some level of in person interaction. Obviously, that wasn't possible in the first 2 years. We've now managed to do that in our hybrid work policy. But the way we did it in the 2 years is we endeavored our best, Gatik. That's what I would say. We organized multiple immersion sessions with the new joiners. We spent a lot more time designing assimilation programs. We rewired all the programs that we had. Obviously, there was a change in format. It became all digital versus in person. That was a big change for us, which I think most organizations would have. But we also thoughtfully redesigned some of the programs in
Hmm.
order to take view of what could be potentially challenging in a remote work scenario, right?
Yeah.
And the example I'd often like to quote is the program that we thought about for first line managers in managing remote teams. Managing at a distance is very different from managing in person. And I personally, as a leader, like every other manager, face it. So we designed a program called Coach with Compassion, for instance, where you, as a first line manager, how do you get to know the pulse of your team? How do you get to know the pulse of a person who's working with you within your team? And how do you detect any signals of detachment,
Yeah,
trouble? And obviously people were going through a lot mentally and physically. So how do we make sure that first line managers empathize and are compassionate in their approach, was one of the new programs that actually sprung to life in the pandemic.
that's so beautiful. And in fact, that's so uh, related and connected also, because we tried to do something similar for our clients, and we built something around leading in a hybrid world, and it's a 5 step model. But one of those 5 steps, Krishna, because you said it's about coaching with compassion and enabling the leaders to pick up the signals in time, right? You use that word, pick up the signals. And in our model, one of the 5 steps is sensing the unsets, right?
Hmm.
Becomes so important for leaders and managers to learn how do you sense the unsets, right? And that, I think, is actually a great segue into what I would love to explore a bit more with you. So as you did that, you obviously made some changes and launched some programs and some initiatives. Um, what Because at Transforming, our interest has always also been around the behavioral side of leaders and managers. And how have you as an organization enabled, or what have you done, or what are you doing to enable your managers and leaders to also bring about shifts in their behaviors, like the one that you spoke about, coaching with compassion? Uh, any other trainings or beyond trainings? Is there anything else that you've done to enable the leaders or get them on board on what does this mean for us? What's that been like?
No, that's a great question, and I'll speak to behaviors, right? And trainings are just, I would say, means to achieve it, or interventions, Gatik, right? The real objective here is really the behavioral shifts you want to see in your leaders. And towards that, I would like to think about it in three aspects. One of them we talked about, which is, I think, very core, which is empathy. And then if you shift further, it could be compassion as well, right? And it's not about sympathy, definitely not sympathy. So I think that's one mindset shift. The second most important one I would like to speak about is the resilience mindset. Uh, and it's often spoken about today, especially post pandemic. But how does one even build resilience into the organization, into leadership in particular?
Hmm.
As you know, at Flipkart, we've had a long history. Audacity is one value, and I think resilience also gets built through multiple. I would say levers. One of them being audacity, and at least I think of it that way, because when you take audacious goals, many a times you land up failing. Also, in pursuit of those goals, you fall short. How do you pivot your thought process? How do you go after a new solution in a new direction? It also builds resilience, right? So that is one angle. Second is, I think we spent a lot of time with leaders in pursuit of getting them to understand new constructs of business that we had to launch. The
Hmm.
example that I like to quote often from a business context is when the entire country moved online and we had to deliver essentials to the country. We had grocery presence in a few cities because that's what our supply chain was capable to deliver. We had to actually transform our supply chain to deliver to multiples of cities, 40, 50 cities in no time. And the way we did it is actually transforming our supply chain. And we could do this only because of a problem presented itself. And that's where
Hmm.
resilience as a muscle gets built. So, in summary, I think audacity and the ability to empower people to solve complex problems,
Yeah.
I would say, builds resilience in the organization. So that's the second mindset, and I'll finish with the third one, is the growth mindset. Um, at Flipkart, constantly change is almost constant, right? So we are always thinking about, okay, how do we build this learning growth mindset in our organization? And I would say honestly, Gatik, it's still a journey in progress, like many other things. And we are trying to see how we can equip and empower our employees. And this is where I think our purpose statement in HR at least comes to life for me, which is, how do we enable every Flipster to maximize their potential and well-being? So how do we do that? Each of us has an innate potential. How do we get them to become the best? So this also transformed for us quite a bit in the post-pandemic world, Gatik. These are the three mindset shifts that we are trying to inculcate.
Love it, love it, love it. In fact, listening to you has given me an aha there, because the way you connected audacity to resilience is so interesting, right? Because if you look at it, resilience is the ability to bounce back, bounce forward, whatever you call it. But uh, it's beautiful, because only when you set yourself up for audacious things are you giving yourself the opportunity to maybe fall short and learn from that. And it's so interesting, because often when I'm hearing people talk about resilience, the angle is a little different. The angle is that you need to slow down, you need to take a step back, and it's that language, which is also right perhaps in some ways, but this is a very interesting way. It's like, it's if it's a muscle that you want to strengthen, you got to push it to the limit to see where you fall short, so you can kind of bounce
Yeah.
back again. Love that analogy, love that analogy. So I also know, Krishna, and having conversations over the last couple of weeks with few people, and obviously the world knows you've also the business has grown, but you've also diversified. There's been a fair sense of other businesses that you've gotten into, acquisitions that you've gotten into, um, and there's so much of that that's happened. And Flipkart has really grown beyond just the Flipkart that it was, right? Um, and with these acquisitions, with this new businesses that you're getting into, uh, integration can sometimes be, in any case, a challenge, right? Cultural integration, people integration, leadership integration, even in the non-pandemic world, would have been a challenge. And add to that the hybrid
Mm.
reality. Has there been any learnings for you around how do you, in a high growth space, in a high acquisition spree, in a hybrid environment, are there any ways that you're using differently to integrate leaders, integrate people, integrate culture? What's working, what's not? Some views on that would be helpful.
Yeah, Gatik, that's a great question because I think when you integrate companies, when you have an M&A happening, an acquisition happening, it's almost integrating someone into a family, right? I mean, it's actually similar in a
True.
lot many. And the what I would say is that we have spent a lot more time in deliberate action in designing and crafting an M&A playbook. And the way we've thought about it is, what are the types of M&As that we go after, and almost classify them into types of treatments that we need to do towards the M&A, right? I'll just give you an example to drive home the point. For instance, you may make an outright acquisition and it may be an acqui hire, where you need
Mm,
to integrate the talent of that company into yours, and therefore it's complete assimilation from every angle that you can think about.
correct.
But on the other side of the spectrum, there could be an acquisition or an investment type of M&A that you make, where you make a minority investment, you could be even a majority investment, but for various considerations you want to keep that company completely separate. It's a separate
Mhm.
brand, been around, there is a the reason that it exists, it has its own identity. In that case, the kind of treatment you would give to that M&A would be very different. For instance, you may not want to have all the talent practices integrated. You may want to pursue a different approach. So I know your question was slightly different from a perspective of people integration, but I just wanted to give you the backdrop of the larger canvas
Yeah,
that I was. Yeah,
and you've kind of answered that, because what I'm getting from you, which is interesting for even people to hear, is different strokes for different folks. Really, it's
yeah,
about being a lot more agile and flexible, even in the way we're looking at integration, right? Not
correct.
using a one size fits all. And while we may not have done that even in the pre-pandemic era, now it's even more pronounced, the need to be really, really specific about how do we want to integrate, how much do we want to integrate, what am I willing to let go, am I just holding on to the thought of integration just for the sake of integration, is there value in the way it is, and so on and so forth. So quite interesting. I know we're getting a few questions from some of our viewers on LinkedIn as well, and I'll come to that. But one question that popped up in my head as you were speaking, Krishna, was also because you have such a large workforce, and in many ways, Flipkart is an employer of choice, right? And you're attracting a lot of talent. Um, from an employee perspective, how's this hybrid been? What are some of the challenges that, as an organization, you had from an employee perspective? What were employees not okay with or wanted differently, and what is it that you struggled with, and how have you tried to work through that? Because again, that's something that we're hearing a lot of people talk about, right? Because different people want different things, and how do you serve everybody's needs, and so on and so forth. So how's that employee angle been for Flipkart, Krishna?
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey again, Gatik. So first of all, uh, as we thought through the hybrid policy that I spoke about in our first conversation at the start of this discussion, the first challenge became for us to explain the why. And Flipkart's a very why culture. We are like all Flipsters ask the question, why? Why? No, there is
Yes.
no policy that gets defined and communicated without answering the why. And like every other trend in the industry, there is a bandwagon, and it becomes obviously popularity to say companies are either going perpetually remote, companies are asking employees to come back into office 5 days a week. They're both ends of the spectrum. So why not remote perpetually? Uh, why this? Why 2 plus 3? I think it became very important and a challenge for us as well to explain the why. And by
Hmm.
the way, get it right the first time around. We had to explain the why several times over, and we continue to do that today with various employee cohorts and explain the why. But it's grounded very much on the principles I spoke about at the start of our conversation. And so, therefore, I think the ability to communicate the why became the most important challenge for us to begin with.
Hmm.
Then, once employees started coming in and adopting, they were obviously promoters. They were people who are also detractors about certain experiences that they might have had in the office, right? In the office space. Are we addressing those? Are we listening to those in the first place? So then
Hmm.
our next point of focus became making sure that we are completely listening to every voice that emerges and we don't leave anything unaddressed. So we got all the voices. We have a regular employee connect that happens through various forums, through our HR, as well as through connects that happen. And we've looked at data. So one of the interesting things that employees told us is, for instance, is that the need for collaboration spaces became a lot more, I would say, higher order need. I don't come into office like it typically used to do deep work.
Hmm.
I prefer to do deep work if I can from wherever I am working remotely. It could be at my home, it could be somewhere. But when I come into office, there is a typical use case that I come in. I come in to collaborate, and I want to engage in rituals where I'm allowed to work with other team members seamlessly. And this could be, by the way, Gatik, socially as well.
Sure.
Um, yeah. So that became another piece of feedback. So, as an example, our next challenge became how do we take all the feedback points that emerged from employee voices and how do we address them swiftly, thoroughly, and also close the loop back with
Yeah.
employees.
And that, I'm sure, is the third part, is perhaps the ongoing step,
Yes, yes,
isn't
absolutely.
it? So, yeah, and in a nutshell, what I'm hearing you say is, I'm hearing you say that it's you really articulated beautifully with three steps. You said number one, about communicating, over communicating, recommunicating the why. Just beginning, letting people know the why, and just communicating that. That's one, to get people to um, figure out their way within this hybrid space. The second one is, and that's where I think a lot of organizations are, and some may be struggling, around listen, seek feedback, listen, keep listening to people, keep getting a sense of what's happening, what are they feeling about the way you're doing it. In your case, the 2 plus 3 kind of a philosophy, for example, right? Keep listening, keep asking, and then close the loop, the last one.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do know, while some organizations are doing number two, I'm not sure how many organizations I'm hearing doing number one and number three effectively. So that's a great point there. Um, so we've
And
we've
Gatik,
got one.
if I may add
Yeah,
one more, yeah, if I
please.
sorry
Yeah.
about that. Just one thing to think about as well when you take feedback. How do you even think about the various aspects or dimensions about the future of work? And future of work is a much larger topic than hybrid, but hybrid is one component of it, is the way I'd like to think about it. Is but the way to think about it is, how does your future of work look from a talent perspective? How does it look from a infra and facilities perspective, right? And how does it look from a perspective of your policies?
Yeah.
um, and if you actually start to classify some of the employee feedback that's emerging as well as your work into these three so-called work streams, a lot of things start falling in place for you as well, because I don't think hybrid can be answered overnight. It's something that will take consistent work across these three work streams for us.
No, absolutely. You're so right. And I'm shifting my gears listening to you because uh, I was having this conversation with another leader who I'm not at the liberty of naming right now. Brilliant leader, Krishna. And he was talking about the future of work from a physical space perspective, right? And he used this analogy and he said, the future is going to be office spaces are going to be community hubs, right?
Hmm.
And he said, people have used this word community quite loosely over the years, so it's become kind of a buzzword and a nice to use word. But he used this analogy, which I found very interesting, because there's these questions around how do I stay connected with the organization if I'm not coming, and if I'm not working from office every day and all. He said, look, and he said, I'm not a religious person. This leader said, and don't take this religiously, but you have a place of worship, right? Whether it's a temple, whether it's a masjid, whether it's a church, whether it's whatever, you have a place of worship. That's your community where you have some shared understanding, right? Some people go there every day. Some people have this ritual. They will want to go to their community every day in the morning. Some people go twice a day. Some people will only go on a Tuesday. Some people will only go on a Sunday. Some people will only go on a Diwali or a Easter or a Eid, right? But the point is, you have that central place that invites people as and when they want to kind of come in and holds that space for them, right? Which I found such a powerful analogy that the future of work is going to be office spaces may shift to being community hubs. And I know a few organizations that are also already talking about redesigning their office space to serve for this community hub. That's a little far out for me to even visualize, but I'm quite interested in seeing how that shapes up. Um, we have a few questions, Krishna, if I can bring them to you from
Sure.
people who are viewing on LinkedIn Live. There's one question from Manthan Thakkar saying, how have you managed employee resistance? Because now most startups are offering work from home, which I think you've kind of addressed to a fair bit. How has Flipkart managed reducing attrition? So I think two kind of connected questions. Is there something more that you'd like to add to what you've said? Specific question is now that when you're attracting talent, a lot of other startups may be offering full-time work from home.
Mhm,
Uh,
mhm.
so how are you kind of battling that or addressing that? Would you like to
Yeah.
share something there?
Yeah, I think I spoke about it a bit, Gatik. I think for an internal employee base, the why question applies equally when you're talking to prospects outside. And the question often asked is, why are you in this particular hybrid policy? Why not perpetually remote? So, therefore, I think that the way we seek to answer it is precisely addressing how we think about work at Flipkart, and how do we create the magic that we've done over the last 15 years, right? And that defines us, and therefore that's why we've chosen this approach. So explaining that to prospects is the way I would think about it. So nothing further much to add to that. On the
Yeah.
second part to your question on attrition in particular, like every other company in the industry over the last couple of years, it has obviously been a challenge for us as well, right? And uh, the way we have focused on it is to focus on the factors we can control, which is in pursuit of the purpose that I talked about, which is, empowering every flipster or enabling every flipster to really become the best version of themselves. So
Yeah.
staying true to that purpose and keeping our heads down and focusing on the things that matter for our employees, which is the quality of work that they do, the long term careers that they can build with us. And it is not a career which is vertical only in nature. It's a career which has a breadth of experiences that you can offer, And thirdly, do they connect with the purpose of the organization? Can we somehow make that magical connection between individual purpose and organizational purpose? These are the three areas we continue to focus on, and our efforts, our inputs in these direction have yielded results for us
Yeah.
of late, right? So I think that is something that we continue to stay true to.
Yeah. And this is so much you, Krishna, as I'm hearing you speak, because it's so lovely. Each time you speak, there's so much power in connecting back to the why and the purpose, right? And I guess that's somewhere perhaps the anchor for Flipkart in terms of defining this, just reconnecting and enabling people to reconnect with that why, with that purpose. Because each time you've spoken, I've seen you passionately go back to that, saying that, look, it's no secret sauce. I think it's only about getting that right and reiterating that and exploring that and expressing that again and again, which I think is really powerful. Thanks for that. There's another question that we have, Krishna, about Amita saying that there was this piece in Economic Times about proximity bias, and the fear of how proximity bias can impact appraisals. In a work from home versus work from office kind of environment. Um, and I know it's been a question for many leaders, many organizations. But is there something that you folks are doing to address this or find a solve for it?
Yeah, it's still early days, Gatik. I would say that obviously in the first 2 years this was not a problem because everybody was remote. Uh,
That's true. There was no proximity at all for there to be a proximity bias, right?
so the complexity has actually got introduced in the last 6 months or so, right? Since we've started to actually come back into the office in the hybrid capacity that I spoke about. But I can tell you this, everything that we do has both a qualitative and a quantitative aspect to it. So when we think about proximity bias, we want to make sure that one, we educate all our managers, our employees towards that, and can we get them to be aware about it? Like it's almost like unconscious bias in hiring, for example. We talk about that in the industry. And how do we actually solve for that now in this new construct being proximity bias? So creating as much of awareness has been one action that we've taken. Second is look at data.
Mhm.
Look at your performance distribution, and look at correlation and with the data that how many people have come into work. Do you find people who are not coming into work as often, uh, performing lower than their counterparts? And is the performance benchmark different for them just because
Mhm.
that they're not close to you? So that's the kind of data we've also started looking at, and that will keep us very honest about whether our inputs or practices that we are doing, interventions we are doing, are actually yielding results in the first place.
I think that's such a great point. Yeah? Make data your friend to battle this proximity bias, right? And that's such a great point because we all know that performance discussions, appraisal discussions can be a matter of subjective feelings and all that may happen between two individuals, and that's been the challenge for decades for us. But now even more so, and I love this point that you're bringing up, because as organizations in any case are moving more towards data analytics and leveraging data more, maybe it's time for us in performance management to balance the proximity bias, or to check the proximity bias
Yes.
by making data a friend and saying, and each leader making sure that each leader is becoming aware that that's the muscle that they need to exercise of making data their friend. Love that point, Krishna. Thanks so much for sharing that. And last one I have for you, which is something that I want to hear from you personally as well, and I'm sure others do too. What is your sense? And it's this is like a crystal ball gazing question, Krishna. And I know none of us have the answers, but what's your personal sense of what the future of hybrid, what the future of this looks like? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I'll try to look into the crystal ball, but I could get it awfully wrong as well.
Don't
But
worry, we are all in the same boat, Krishna, aren't we? Yeah.
so I think first of all, if I think about, and it's very connected to the conversation we had, Gatik, on future of work. It's hybrid is a part of it because hybrid is one we spoke about today. But the future of work I see is definitely that jobs, as we understand them, will turn into not jobs which are associated with an individual, but a set of roles that you can perform. Like if you deconstruct a job or a decompose a job, uh, what are the types of roles you perform as part of that job? And it's more going to get connected to roles. And therefore, it's going to get mapping, roles are going to get mapped to individuals versus jobs getting mapped to individuals. I think that's going to be something to think about in the future. And as a result of that, the way to think about how that role is getting performed, it could actually lend itself to in-person interactions, it could lend itself to hybrid, it could lend itself to a perpetually remote construct as well. And once you start doing that, then you have almost a intermesh of roles on one hand, individuals on the other, and the modality being anything that you can imagine, which lends itself to that role achieving its maximum potential, right?
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's the
That is
way I
interesting.
think.
That is refreshing. That is new. That is certainly, I haven't heard this. This is, yeah, looking at roles, looking at people, and looking at the interplay between that. So, not jobs, but roles. Quite fascinating. And, there was a time when the world went through this change from hierarchical to matrix structures, which was one move. And maybe this is going to be one such next big one where it becomes more about the roles rather than jobs. That is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you so much, Krishna, for being here, and I know you're a busy person, and but to take out time for this, really appreciate that, Krishna. I'm sure people watching and listening to you have taken back something for themselves. So thanks really for joining us here, Krishna.
No, thank you so much, Gatik, for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. And for everybody else watching, just stay tuned next Tuesday. And Krishna, if you'd like to join in as well, you'll get to meet Sandra. You haven't seen her in a while, I reckon. So Sandra is going to be in conversation with Francisco Ramirez. And he's the co-founder of Her Okay So. Brilliant person more than anything else. And Sandra is somebody who's really passionate about DEI, and therefore pride in action is the topic of our next LinkedIn Live, which is happening on the coming Tuesday. So thanks once again, Krishna, and look forward to staying connected. And have a wonderful, wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.